January 5th, 2026, 11:30 at night. A mother is moving through her house on North 26th Street in Milwaukee when she smells smoke. She goes straight to her daughter's bedroom door, the door that has been closed all day, all evening, all night, and she tries to open it. A 21-year-old man is on the other side. He doesn't move. Then he runs out of the house into the January cold, gone. And then, moments after he disappears, the bedroom catches fire. Michelle forces her way in. The room is ablaze, and there on the bed is her daughter Glattis, 22 years old, 5 months pregnant, completely still. What Michelle does not yet know is that her daughter was almost certainly already dead before the first match was struck, that the man who just ran had spent hours in that room with her body, waiting. This is the story of Glattis Johnson, of who she was before that door closed for the last time, of the documented history of threats and violence that led to that night, of a mother who has now lost children to fire twice in one lifetime, 33 years apart, and of a 3-year-old girl who was somewhere in that house when it all happened. This is the Conviction Files. We go inside the cases that don't fit cleanly in a headline, where the documented facts are devastating enough, but the human story underneath them is what breaks you. We sit inside who these people were, what they carried, and what it cost everyone around them when it came apart. We hold the moral weight without delivering verdicts that belong to you. Subscribe if that's what you're here for. Glattis Johnson was born in Milwaukee, and she was named after her late grandmother, a deliberate act, a family saying, "This name means something and so does she." She was 22 years old in January of 2026, which means she became a mother for the first time at 19, in a city that does not make that easy, and she did it without flinching. Her 3-year-old daughter could already spell, could recite her ABCs, could talk up a storm. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because somebody sits on the floor with flashcards. It happens because somebody reads the same book for the 40th time, and the answer is always yes. Her aunt, Josie Johnson Smith, described Glattis as the most loving person you could ever meet.
Why would you take her life like that, and you knowing she was having a baby by you?
Said she had a spirit that could lift anyone out of a bad mood. If you were down, she would cheer you up. She was that person, the one who made everything feel a little brighter just by being in the room. That is a specific kind of person, the kind that leaves an absence you cannot fill. By January 2026, she was 5 months pregnant with a baby boy and living back at her mother's house on North 26th Street. The word back is load-bearing. She had been somewhere else, and she had left. Josie said it plainly to the press in the days after Glattis died. He had threatened to kill her before. That is why she ended up back with her mom. She had heard the threat, believed it, and gone somewhere with family around her, other ears in the building, other people between her and the danger. And the danger came anyway. On New Year's Eve, 1992, a fire breaks out at a family tavern on Milwaukee's north side. Michelle Johnson loses 2 of her sons that night, Terrence Bizzle Johnson, 4 years old, and Antonio Bizzle Johnson, 2 years old, both dead of smoke inhalation. A mother buries 2 toddlers before most people have buried anyone. She rebuilt. She kept going. She had more children. She named one of them after her own mother to carry the family forward, to say this family is still here and still worth naming children after. That child was Glattis. What you have to hold on to is this. Michelle Johnson already knew from the deepest possible place what fire takes. 33 years later, almost to the day, she smelled smoke in a hallway and ran toward it anyway. She fought a blocked door. She pulled her daughter from those flames with her own hands. She did everything a mother can do. And now she is the one raising Glattis's 3-year-old daughter. She said it herself, still in shock at the scene. Now I got to stand up for her baby. I have to raise my grandchild with my other daughters.
She is the one who found her daughter's body in an upstairs bedroom.
I found her, and I didn't want her to burn up, and God had my back. He had my back, but he still took her and her baby, but she's in heaven with my mom. And she's watching down on me, but now I got to stand up for her baby. I have to raise my child with my other daughters.
That sentence is the full weight of what was left behind. Cameron Washington was 21 years old. No prior criminal record in Wisconsin. That is what the surface of the documented record shows. Underneath it, authorities confirmed a documented history of domestic violence between Cameron and Glattis. The full contents of that record have not been made public. What we know is that it was documented. What we know is that it was serious enough for Glattis to leave. What we know is that when she moved home to her mother's house, he moved in too. He was in the house on North 26th Street. He was in that bedroom. And on January 5th, 2026, the door stayed closed all day. Here is what the documented record shows about that day. The family had not heard Glattis's voice since morning, had not seen her come out of that bedroom for food, for water, to check on her daughter. The door stayed closed from morning through evening through night. According to the prosecutorial theory laid out in court days later, Glattis was already dead in that room for several hours before the fire was set. Think about what that timeline means. If prosecutors are correct, Cameron Washington sat in a room with the body of the woman he had just killed, in a house full of her family, surrounded by people who loved her for hours. He was not fleeing. He was not panicking. He was waiting for the house to go quiet, waiting for the moment when a fire might look like an accident. Waiting with the patience of someone who had already decided what came next and was managing the logistics of getting away with it. This is what coercive control looks like at its end point, not a moment of uncontrollable rage, not an explosion that surprised everyone including him, a deliberate, methodical sequence, threats made before, documented before, serious enough that Glattis had already left once, and now carried out in the house she came home to for safety. She did what survivors are told to do, and it still ended here. The prosecutor who stood before the court chose two specific words: dangerous and deliberate. Here's a question for you. Glattis had already left. She had heard the threats, believed them, taken her daughter, and come home to her mother's house. And a man with a documented history of threatening her moved into that house with her. So when we tell women to leave, when we hold leaving up as the answer, the action that transfers a woman from danger into safety, are we telling them the truth? Or are we comforting ourselves that there is a right move, a safe move, an action that puts the responsibility somewhere other than the system that allowed this man to follow her home? Glattis did everything right. That is the documented fact. Whether failure actually lives, I don't know. Maybe you do. January 5th, 2026, Milwaukee, temperature hovering around freezing. Sometime during the day, the exact hour is not in the public record. Cameron and Glattis are in the upstairs bedroom, door closed. Hours pass without anyone hearing Glattis's voice. 11:23 p.m., a call comes into emergency services. 11:30 p.m. Michelle reaches the bedroom door, blocked. She cannot get through. Moments later, Cameron is gone down the stairs, out the front door, into the dark, and the room is ablaze. First responders arrive. Glattis is extracted from the burning bedroom and pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner documents bruises across her body, blood from her nose and mouth. These injuries preceded the fire. Something happened in that room before the first flame. Within 30 minutes of the 911 call, Milwaukee police locate Cameron Washington approximately 1 mile away at a residence on 29th Street. He is taken into custody without resistance. A lighter is in his pocket. January 9th, 4 days later, a vigil in the January cold. Michelle Johnson can barely speak. Josie steps in. Why would you take her life like that? And you knowing she was having a baby by you. Shortly after, Cameron appears at the Milwaukee County Courthouse facing 6 felony charges, among them first-degree recklessly endangering safety and arson. No homicide charge yet. The medical examiner's report is not complete. Bond is set at $100,000. His next court date is January 20th. The Milwaukee County Medical Examiner officially categorizes Glattis Johnson's manner of death as homicide. Here's a question for you. A prior documented history of domestic violence, prior threats to kill her, reported, a woman who had already moved out because of those threats, a man who followed her into the house she moved back to, a bedroom door closed all day. At what point does documented history become a legally actionable warning that separates two people before it ends this way? And if the answer is that it doesn't, that prior threats and documented violence are not sufficient on their own, then what are those records actually for? Who are they protecting? I'm not asking rhetorically. I am asking because Glattis Johnson is dead and the documentation existed before she was. You cannot fully hold what happened on January 5, 2026, without going back to New Year's Eve, 1992. 33 years before her daughter died on North 26th Street, Michelle Johnson stood in the ruins of a different fire and buried the boys she had carried. She rebuilt herself from that, had more children, named one of them Glattis after her own mother, to carry something forward through all the grief, to say, this family is not finished. 33 years almost to the day. That number is not a statistic. It is a mother's entire adult life spent surviving the unsurvivable and building anyway, and then being handed the same fire twice with different names on the gravestones. Glattis was the continuation of something that was supposed to outlast the grief that came before her. She was named to carry a legacy forward, and Cameron Washington closed a bedroom door. Here's a question for you. Michelle Johnson smelled smoke in 2026 and ran toward it knowing from her bones exactly what smoke means when it shouldn't be there. She has known that since 1992, she fought, she pulled, she did everything a person can do. And now she is raising a child who was somewhere in that house when it happened, who will grow up and ask questions, who will one day want the truth about her mother and her father and what happened in that bedroom. When that day comes, and it will come, does that child deserve the full truth, or does she deserve to be protected from it for as long as possible? And who gets to decide? There is no clean answer. There is only a grandmother making choices no one should have to make, in the ruins of something she never should have had to survive twice. 4 days after Glattis dies, Michelle Johnson stands before the people who came out in the cold to remember her daughter, and she can barely stay upright. She keeps saying the same words, I want my baby back, not the language grief produces when it has had time to find something socially bearable. 4 days out is still shock. 4 days is still the moment before the wait becomes real. I want my baby back is not a sentence about theology or comfort. It is a mother's body refusing to accept what her mind already knows. In those early days, she said something else, something that sits at the intersection of grief and moral clarity and love. She said, if Glattis didn't want to be with him anymore, she had the right to live her life. In the middle of the worst thing she has experienced since 1992, Michelle Johnson found the essential sentence. Her daughter had a right to her own life. She exercised that right, and it was taken from her. The family started a GoFundMe to cover funeral expenses, because Glattis was 22 years old and nobody had planned for this. Nobody budgets for burying a daughter and an unborn grandson in the same week. The 3-year-old is with her grandmother now. She asks why she notices things, she wants to understand them. Michelle told reporters that eventually this little girl will see her mother in a casket. That sentence lands differently when you know Michelle has already stood at 2 small caskets. She is not speaking in abstraction. She is telling you what she already knows how to survive, and what she is now being asked to survive again, this time with a grandchild watching. The community showed up. People who knew Glattis, people who didn't, neighbors, strangers, all of them in the January cold releasing balloons, because sometimes that is the only thing left to do with grief when the words run out. 11:30 p.m., the second-floor hallway. Michelle Johnson reaches her daughter's bedroom door and tries the handle. The door doesn't open. Cameron Washington is on the other side of it, holding it closed, in a house that is not his, at a door he has no right to be blocking. Michelle pushes, he holds, then she turns, and Cameron has produced a firearm and it is pointed at Glattis's sister. Standing in the hallway behind Michelle, doing nothing wrong, going nowhere, a gun in her face. Then he runs, out of that bedroom, down those stairs, out the front door, and moments later the fire. Michelle hits the door. The closet is burning. The curtains surrounding the bed are on fire, orange and climbing, and there is Glattis on the bed, lying the way people lie when they have been still for a long time. Michelle doesn't freeze. She pours water. She fights the flames. She gets her hands on her daughter and she pulls Glattis off that bed, drags her across the floor, away from the burning curtains, away from the fire. Glattis does not move, does not respond, has bruises, has blood at her nose and her mouth, has been on that bed long before the first flame was lit. Michelle spoke to reporters afterward, and her words came in the syntax of someone whose mind is still in that room. I found her, and I didn't want her to burn up, and God had my back. He had my back, and he had my back, but he still took her and her baby. But she's in heaven with my mom, and she's watching down on me. God had her back, he still took her. She's in heaven, she's watching down on me. Four things sitting next to each other that are not a contradiction. That is a woman using every framework available simultaneously because one is not enough to hold this. That is survival in real time. The Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office ruled Glattis Johnson's death a homicide. The cause of death remained listed as undetermined pending full investigation, the forensic record still establishing what specifically killed her before the fire was set. What the examination documented was unambiguous: injuries that predated the flames. Whatever happened in that bedroom happened before Cameron Washington lit anything. At his initial court appearance, the prosecutor stood before the court and said, "Our theory of the case is that the victim who died was dead in the house for at least several hours, and the fire was set in order to cover it up." Court Commissioner Maria Dorsey explained why homicide charges had not yet been filed. The medical examiner's report was not complete at time of charging. The 6 felony counts already filed carried a combined potential exposure of more than 50 years. First-degree intentional homicide was the recommended charge at booking. The investigation was ongoing. Glattis Johnson is buried. Her unborn son, 4 months from being born, who never received a publicly announced name, is buried with her. Cameron Washington is in custody. The legal proceedings continue. Michelle Johnson is raising her granddaughter. She has her other daughters beside her. She has a community that came out in the cold and will keep saying Glattis's name. And she has a child growing up next to her who is going to want to understand what happened, and Michelle is going to have to find the words. Josie Johnson Smith said what needed to be said when Michelle couldn't. "He took my niece's life. He threatened to kill her before. That's why she ended up back with her mom. The threat was documented. The history was documented. Glattis came home. He followed. The door closed." Glattis Johnson's name was chosen to carry something forward. Her grandmother's name. A family's refusal to be erased by what it had already survived. She was 22 years old, 5 months pregnant with her unborn son, and the kind of person who poured everything into the daughter she left behind. She heard a man threaten to kill her. She believed him. She left. She went home to her mother and her sisters. She surrounded herself with people who loved her. She did what survivors are told to do. And the man who made the threat followed her there, closed a bedroom door, and carried out what he had already decided. So here is the final question, and I am not going to answer it. Domestic violence documentation existed in this case before January 5, 2026. Threats had been made and reported. Glattis had already left once. None of it was enough to put a wall between her and what happened. So what is the honest accounting of that failure, and whose is it? Is it the system that doesn't treat prior threats as the life-or-death emergencies they are? Is it a culture that still reads a man following his girlfriend back to her mother's house as a private matter between two people? Or is the most honest and most unbearable answer this: that some people, once they have decided, cannot be stopped by any address change or any piece of paper, and that what we are really asking survivors to do when we tell them to leave is not to reach safety, but to reveal the decision the other person has already made? Glattis Johnson revealed it. The decision had already been made. She is gone. What do you think failed her? Not a general statement about domestic violence. What do you believe went wrong here, specifically, at what point, and whose responsibility it was to stop it? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every one. Subscribe if this is the kind of story you're here for. Share it If you believe her name deserves to be remembered beyond the headline it became. This is the Conviction Files. The case is yours now.